In the heart of the village of Ifo, hidden between the thick forest and rolling hills, stood a massive church. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon of faith for the community, where people gathered every Sunday to seek solace, strength, and blessings. This church was the pride of the village, its steeple reaching towards the heavens, its bells ringing joyously every morning. But within its walls, there was a secret, one that would soon be exposed. The pastor, Pastor Adebayo, was a man revered by all. He had a commanding presence, a voice that could bring even the most hardened hearts to tears, and a smile that promised salvation. He was known for his wisdom, his powerful sermons, and his connection to God. But no one knew that behind the walls of the church, hidden from the eyes of the faithful, lay a dark and twisted secret. The church had always been a place of safety for the villagers, but for one young man, the church's sanctuary was a place of fear and confusion. His name was Tunde, a quiet young man with a deep love for his faith. He had grown up in the church, attending services every Sunday with his parents. But as he grew older, he began to notice things that didn't sit right. The pastor's behavior became more mysterious. His sermons were filled with strange, cryptic words that seemed to go beyond scripture. The congregation never questioned him. Pastor Adebayo was their leader, their guide. But Tunde couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, after the regular evening service, Tunde noticed something unusual. The church hall was empty, save for the faint hum of the cooling fans. He had been lingering around the building, waiting for his mother to finish a prayer meeting, when he saw it. A figure moving swiftly down the long corridor of the church. The figure was wearing a mask, one of the traditional masquerades that were sometimes used in village ceremonies. But there was something about the way this figure moved that made Tunde uneasy. The masquerade didn't look like it was part of a celebration. It was as if it was hiding something, sneaking through the church with a purpose. Curiosity got the best of him, and Tunde followed the figure from a distance. The masquerade stopped in front of a door that Tunde had never noticed before, a small, unmarked door near the back of the church. The figure entered, disappearing into the dark room beyond. Tunde's heart pounded in his chest. He had never seen anyone enter this room before. The pastor had always kept the church pristine, the doors always open to the community. But this room, it was different. Something told him he needed to know what was behind it. He waited until the masquerade was out of sight and then hurried to the door. The handle was cold, and as he pushed it open, a faint smell of incense and something else, something metallic, filled the air. Inside, Tunde's eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light. But what he saw next made his blood run cold. On the far side of the room, a large altar stood covered in black cloth. Candles flickered around it, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the altar was a large, ornate mirror, its frame carved with strange symbols. The room felt heavy, thick with a presence that wasn't right. Tunde took a step forward, his feet barely making a sound on the stone floor. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This was not the house of worship he had grown up in. This was something dark, something twisted. And standing at the altar, wearing his robes, was none other than Pastor Adebayo. He was chanting softly, his voice low and rhythmic, as he raised his hands towards the mirror. The masquerade was kneeling at his feet, whispering words that Tunde could not understand. It felt as though the very air was alive with malevolent energy. Tunde wanted to turn and run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the pastor's ritual unfold. This was no prayer. This was no holy communion with God. This was something far worse. As Pastor Adebayo continued his chant, Tunde's heart beat faster. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows darker. The mirror began to glow, faint at first, but then brighter, as if some unseen force was pulling at it. Tunde's mind raced. What was this? What had the pastor been hiding from the people? Just as Tunde took a step forward, a voice pierced the air, sharp, commanding. You should not have come here. Tunde froze. Pastor Adebayo turned slowly, his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. His eyes glowed unnaturally, a sickly yellow hue. The masquerade stood up, its face hidden behind the mask. Tunde's breath caught in his throat. Who are you? Tunde whispered, his voice shaking. I am the keeper of this secret, the pastor said, his voice deep and resonant. And now, you will be part of it. Tunde backed away, his heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The pastor stepped forward, his hands still raised in the air, as if summoning something from the depths of the earth. "You've seen too much," the pastor said, a twisted smile forming beneath his hood. "You will not leave this room alive." But before the pastor could take another step, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A loud crash echoed from the main hall, followed by a roar of voices. The door to the secret room burst open, and Tunde's heart leapt as a group of villagers stormed in, led by a figure Tunde knew all too well, the Masquerade, but this time, the mask was off. It was the village elder, Chief Olamide. "Pastor Adebayo." Chief Olamide shouted. "Your time is up." The villagers surged forward, pulling Tunde out of the way as they grabbed the pastor. Tunde stood frozen, his mind still reeling from the events he had just witnessed. What had he just uncovered? And why had the village elder been involved? "Take him," Chief Olamide ordered. "The truth must come to light." As the villagers dragged Pastor Adebayo out of the room, Tunde looked at the mirror one last time. The glow had dimmed, and the symbols on the frame seemed to writhe and shift as if they were alive. Tunde knew that he had just uncovered a secret that would change everything. He had to tell the village what he had seen, what they had all been blind to for so long. The pastor's evil was not just a personal sin, it was something that had taken root in their very community, in their church. The masquerade, the rituals, the lies, everything had been a facade, and Tunde was the one who had seen through it. As he walked out of the room, the door creaking shut behind him, Tunde felt a sense of finality settle over him. The truth had been exposed. And now, the healing could begin. The church's heavy wooden doors closed with a thud, the finality of the sound echoing in Tunde's mind. His heart raced as he stood at the entrance, the weight of what he had just witnessed pressing down on him like 1,000 stones. The room had been dark, cold, and filled with evil, and yet, it seemed like it was just the beginning. There was so much more to this mystery, and Tunde couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into a trap that was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. As the villagers began to gather around the front of the church, talking in hushed tones, Tunde could feel their nervous energy. The air was thick with confusion, disbelief, and fear. No one knew what had really happened behind those walls, and Tunde was the only one who had seen it. He had no idea what to say. How could he even begin to explain what he had witnessed? Chief Olamide stood at the front, giving orders to the crowd. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his urgency. Tunde had always respected Chief Olamide. He was a man of integrity, the kind of person everyone trusted in times of need. But now, seeing him here, in the church, alongside the villagers, made Tunde feel uneasy. He had never seen the elder act this way, and he didn't know if it was a good thing or a sign of something darker. Tunde finally gathered the courage to approach Chief Olamide, his feet dragging with every step. The elder turned when he noticed Tunde walking toward him, his eyes searching the young man's face. "Are you all right, Tunde?" Chief Olamide asked softly, his voice filled with concern. "You've seen more than any of us ever expected." Tunde nodded slowly, but his mouth felt dry, as if the words had evaporated from his mind. He wanted to speak, to tell Chief Olamide everything, but his mind was a whirlwind of confusion. His eyes flicked toward the church's doors, half expecting to see Pastor Adebayo, but the man was gone. The once confident and revered pastor had been dragged away by the villagers, and the heavy burden of secrecy that had cloaked him seemed to evaporate with every step he took. Where did they take him? Tunde finally managed to whisper, his voice hoarse. Chief Olamide's face tightened, and he motioned for Tunde to follow him as he walked away from the gathering crowd. "To the village square," the elder said grimly. "We need to confront him there. The truth cannot be hidden any longer." Tunde followed silently, but his thoughts were far from the direction they were headed. How had he ended up in this situation? What had brought Pastor Adebayo to this dark place, and why had the man concealed such a secret for so long? These questions gnawed at his mind. He had grown up in this church, attending service every Sunday without a single thought of deception. But now, the sanctuary had become a place of fear. The walls that had once provided comfort now felt like a prison. As they reached the village square, Tunde could see a crowd had already gathered. The atmosphere was tense, and whispers spread like wildfire through the people. Word had gotten out about the strange events inside the church, and the villagers were eager for answers. But there was one question that remained. Was Pastor Adebayo truly a man of God, or had he been deceiving them all? At the center of the square stood Pastor Adebayo, his head bowed in shame, his hands bound tightly behind his back. A few of the village men stood near him, watching closely, their expressions a mixture of anger and disbelief. Chief Alamide stepped forward, his voice carrying across the square as he addressed the crowd. "We have gathered here today not just to confront a man, but to confront the darkness that has been hidden among us for so long," the chief said, his voice steady and filled with authority. "This man, Pastor Adebayo, has lied to us all. He has led us to believe in false miracles, hidden secrets, and a world that does not belong in the light." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others raising their voices in anger. Tunde stood at the back, watching quietly, his stomach churning with the weight of the truth. It felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling, and the church he had once trusted seemed to be falling apart. Pastor Adebayo lifted his head slightly, his eyes bloodshot and weary. His voice, once strong and commanding, was now a mere whisper. "I did what I had to do," he said softly. "The power I possess, the miracles, they were not my own. I was chosen. I had no choice." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Tunde felt his blood run cold. The words Pastor Adebayo had spoken sent a chill through him. Was this really the man who had led their church for so many years, the man who had preached about faith, healing, and salvation? "I don't understand," Tunde finally spoke, his voice trembling. "You spoke of faith, of God's power. Why would you do this?" Pastor Adebayo's eyes locked onto Tunde's, his gaze filled with a strange, almost manic intensity. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to bring darkness into the light? No. I was chosen, just like those before me. The powers that brought me here, those forces are not human. They are ancient. They are powerful. And they cannot be ignored." Tunde's heart raced. What was the pastor talking about? What forces? What powers? Chief Alamide stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Enough of your lies, Adebayo. The people are no longer blind to your deceit. Tell us the truth. What was really happening in that secret room? What was in that mirror?" Pastor Adebayo closed his eyes, his expression pained. "The mirror," he whispered, "was the key. The key to unlocking power beyond imagination. But it came with a price." "Tell us," the crowd shouted in unison. The pastor paused, as though gathering the last bit of strength he had left. The mirror was no ordinary object. It was an ancient artifact, a tool used by those who seek to harness the power of the river spirits. They call it the Serpent's Mirror. It was said to open a door to another world, a world where power, wealth, and immortality could be obtained. But at a cost. Tunde's heart skipped a beat. The river spirits? The Serpent's Mirror? He remembered the strange symbols, the eerie rituals, and the feeling of coldness that had filled the room. It all made sense now. "And you used this power?" Chief Alamide's voice was filled with disgust. Pastor Adebayo nodded, his hands shaking. "Yes? I used it. I had no choice. The mirror chose me. And with it, I became something more than human. I could heal, I could perform miracles. But the power, it came with a price. It demanded sacrifice." Tunde's breath caught in his throat. "Sacrifice?" "Yes," Pastor Adebayo whispered. "The mirror required souls. It needed the energy of the living, the essence of those who had been deceived by my miracles. And so, I gave it to the spirits. I gave them what they wanted, lives, souls, bodies." The crowd gasped. Tunde could hardly believe what he was hearing. The pastor had not been performing miracles at all, he had been using dark, forbidden powers to manipulate and control people. The truth was worse than he could have imagined. "Who else?" Chief Alamide demanded. "Who else did you sacrifice?" Pastor Adebayo's face twisted with pain. "Many," he whispered. "Many? They came to me, seeking answers, seeking children, healing, wealth, and I gave them what they wanted. But I never told them the cost. I never told them what I had to give in return." Tunde felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The pastor had been leading people into the very depths of darkness, all for his own gain. And now, the truth was finally coming to light. Chief Alamide raised his hand, signaling for silence. "This madness ends today. Pastor Adebayo, your reign of terror is over. The truth will be known, and the people will be freed from your deceit." The villagers erupted into cheers, but Tunde's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the mirror, about the room, and about the evil that had been hidden in plain sight. What else had the pastor done? What had he really unleashed on the village? But before Tunde could process everything, he heard a voice behind him. A voice that would change everything. "I know what you saw," a woman said softly. Tunde turned around in shock. Standing behind him was a figure he had never expected to see. It was the village elder's wife, Madame Folake, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "I know what you saw in that room," she repeated. "And it's not over yet." Tunde stood frozen in place, his eyes locked onto Madame Folake, the elder's wife. The village elder was a respected figure in their community, and Madame Folake had always been known for her grace and wisdom. But now, standing before him with her pale face and fearful eyes, she seemed to be someone he barely recognized. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing something far darker beneath her composed exterior. "I know what you saw," Madame Folake repeated softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Tunde's heart pounded in his chest. He had hoped, prayed even, that he wasn't the only one who knew the truth, that someone else had seen what he had seen. But the fear in Madame Folake's eyes told him that this wasn't just a case of mutual understanding. No, it was something more, a hidden reality, a dangerous knowledge that had been kept secret for far too long. He took a step toward her, his voice trembling. "You? What do you mean? What do you know about the mirror? About the pastor?" Madame Folake glanced around quickly, her eyes scanning the area, as though checking for anyone who might overhear. She leaned in closer to Tunde, her voice dropping even lower. "You don't understand? There's more to Pastor Adebayo than anyone ever realized. More than even the village elders knew." Tunde's mind raced, and his chest tightened. "What do you mean? How could the elders not know? The pastor has been a part of this village for so long. He's been a beacon of faith for everyone." Madame Folake shook her head. "That's what he wanted you to think. He wanted everyone to believe that he was a man of God. But he wasn't. He was a vessel, a puppet for something far more powerful, far more dangerous than any of us could have ever imagined." Tunde stepped back, his mind reeling. "What are you saying? How could we have missed it? How could I have missed it?" Madame Folake's eyes softened with sympathy, but there was also a hint of sadness in her gaze. "The pastor has been hiding something for years, something that goes beyond faith. It's a secret that has been passed down through generations, one that no one in the village was meant to uncover. But you did, Tunde. You saw the truth, and now you're in danger." "Danger?" Tunde repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "What do you mean? What danger?" Madame Folake looked around again, and then, as though making a decision, she took a deep breath. "Come with me," she said urgently. "There's a place where we can talk. It's safer there. We need to understand the truth of what's happening before it's too late." Without waiting for a response, Madame Folake turned and began walking briskly away from the village square. Tunde hesitated for a moment, his thoughts swirling, but then he followed her. His curiosity, mingled with fear, pushed him forward. There was so much he didn't understand, so much he needed to know. They walked in silence through the village, passing by familiar homes and shops, until they reached the edge of the village, where a small, weathered house stood. It was a modest building, but there was something about it that felt different, as though it held memories, secrets, deep within its walls. Madame Folake led Tunde inside and closed the door behind them. The inside of the house was dimly lit, with shelves lined with old books, trinkets, and strange objects Tunde couldn't quite place. It smelled of incense and herbs, the kind of scent that seemed to linger in the air like a forgotten memory. "Sit," Madame Folake said, gesturing toward a small wooden table in the center of the room. Tunde obeyed, his eyes scanning the room as he sat down. There was a tension in the air, thick and palpable, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to be revealed. Madame Folake took a seat across from him, her face grave. "The mirror you saw," she began, her voice low and steady. "It is not just a piece of glass. It is an ancient artifact, one that has been passed down through generations of spiritual leaders. It is a key to a power that exists beyond our world. A power that feeds on darkness, fear, and sacrifice." Tunde's heart raced again. "A key? To what?" "To the spirit world," Madame Folake replied softly. "To the river spirits. To the serpent god." Tunde's mind reeled. The serpent god? The river spirits? These were names he had only heard in whispered tales, legends of ancient times, told by the elders when they gathered around the fire. But never had he imagined that these stories were real. And now, to hear Madame Folake speak of them so casually, it was as if the world he had known had been turned upside down. Madame Folake continued, her eyes fixed on Tunde. Pastor Adebayo has been the keeper of that mirror for many years. He thought he could control the power it gave him, use it to perform miracles, to gain influence, to build a following. But the mirror is not something to be controlled. It is something that controls you. Tunde swallowed hard. But why? Why didn't anyone see this before? How could he hide something so powerful for so long? The power of the mirror doesn't just grant abilities, Madame Folake explained. It demands a price. Every miracle, every healing, comes at the cost of a soul. The people who believed in Pastor Adebayo's miracles, they didn't know that they were paying for them with their lives. Their essence, their very being, was being taken, slowly and methodically, to fuel the serpent god's power. Tunde's mind reeled. The people who had trusted the pastor, who had prayed for his blessings, for his miracles, had unknowingly been offering themselves as sacrifices. They had been deceived, used as pawns in a game that none of them understood. But there's more, Madame Folake continued, her voice dropping even lower. The mirror doesn't just take souls. It opens a portal, a doorway to the spirit world. A doorway to the river gods. And once that portal is open, it cannot be closed easily. The power it brings is addictive, dangerous. Pastor Adebayo became consumed by it. He thought he could control it, but now it's too late. Tunde's thoughts raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The strange rituals, the eerie dreams, the unsettling feeling he had when he had entered that secret room, it was all connected. The pastor had been feeding the river spirits, sacrificing lives to maintain his power. And now, with the portal open, there was no telling what would come through. But why are you telling me this? Tunde asked, his voice hoarse. What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? How can I stop this? Madame Folake met his gaze, her expression softening. You were chosen, Tunde. You were meant to see the truth. The spirits have marked you. They want you to act. To stop what has been set in motion. Tunde's heart pounded in his chest. Me? But how? I'm just a villager. I don't have any power. What can I do? Madame Folake placed her hand on his, her grip surprisingly firm. You may not have power in the way you think. But you have something stronger than that, Tunde. You have the truth. And with it, you can expose what has been hidden for far too long. Tunde felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had never imagined himself as a hero, as someone who could stand up to such dark forces. But now, faced with the reality of the evil that had taken root in his village, he knew that he couldn't just walk away. He had to do something. He had to act. Where do I start? Tunde asked, his voice barely a whisper. Madame Folake stood up, moving toward a shelf filled with old books and scrolls. She pulled down a dusty tome, its pages worn and yellowed with age. There is a way to close the portal, she said, her voice steady and sure. But it will require strength. And it will require sacrifice. Tunde felt a knot form in his stomach. What kind of sacrifice? Madame Folake opened the book and showed him a page filled with ancient symbols. You will need to face the spirits, confront them, and destroy the mirror. Tunde took a deep breath, his mind spinning with the weight of what lay ahead. I'll do it. Whatever it takes. The following days were a blur of anxiety, anticipation, and unsettling silence. Tunde had never felt more alone, nor more burdened. The weight of what he had learned, the dark secrets hidden within the church, the river spirits, and the evil mirror, lingered in his mind, gnawing at him like a relentless storm. He had gone to Madame Folake's house, seeking answers, hoping to find clarity, but the more he learned, the more questions arose. It felt as though he had uncovered a door to a world that was better left unopened, yet now, it was too late to turn back. He sat on his bed, staring at the worn-out pages of the old book that Madame Folake had given him. The symbols on the pages seemed to pulse with a life of their own, drawing his attention as though beckoning him deeper into a world he could not comprehend. The book was filled with ancient knowledge, rituals, incantations, and prayers that had been passed down through generations of spiritual leaders. It was clear to Tunde that the mirror, the altar, and the dark forces it summoned were tied to something far older than Pastor Adebayo's leadership. This was a curse, a legacy, a power that had been consuming souls for centuries. Madame Folktale had told him that there was a way to close the portal, the way to stop the river spirits from entering the world and wreaking havoc. But it wouldn't be easy. To confront the spirits, to destroy the mirror, Tunde would have to face the very essence of the darkness that had been unleashed. He wasn't just up against Pastor Adebayo's corruption. He was up against an ancient evil that had claimed lives for generations. The thought made Tunde's skin crawl, but it was the only option. The village was depending on him. His faith, his courage, would be tested like never before. The sun had set, and the air grew colder as Tunde walked through the quiet streets of the village. He had decided to speak to his parents. They had raised him with love and faith, but they had also taught him the importance of questioning the things that didn't make sense. They had taught him that true strength came from standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. Tonight, he would need that strength more than ever. As he approached his childhood home, the familiar scent of food cooking drifted through the air. His mother, as always, was busy in the kitchen, preparing their evening meal. The warm glow from the kitchen window made Tunde's heart ache with a deep, painful nostalgia. He had always felt safe here, protected from the troubles of the outside world. But now, that sense of safety felt distant. It was as if a dark cloud was looming over everything, and Tunde couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. He knocked gently on the door and stepped inside. His mother, a kind woman with a gentle smile, looked up from her cooking, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Tunde, you're home early? How was your day?" she asked, her voice full of warmth. Tunde hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. He could see the concern in his mother's eyes. She knew something was bothering him, but he hadn't yet found the courage to share the full truth. How could he tell her that the church they had all trusted was built on lies and dark magic? How could he explain that the man they had all followed, prayed with, and believed in was not who he seemed to be? "Mother, I need to talk to you," Tunde said, his voice soft but steady. "There's something I need to tell you. Something important." His mother stopped what she was doing, wiping her hands on her apron and turning to face him. "What's troubling you, Tunde?" Tunde took a deep breath, trying to steady the nerves that threatened to consume him. "It's about the church, about Pastor Adebayo." His mother's face instantly shifted from warmth to concern. "What about him?" she asked cautiously. She had always respected Pastor Adebayo, just as everyone in the village did. He had been the spiritual leader, the one who brought them closer to God. The thought of anything being wrong with him was almost impossible to fathom. I don't know where to start, Mother. But the truth is, Pastor Adebayo is not who he seems. He's been hiding something dark, something evil. The miracles he's performed, they aren't real. He's been using dark magic to manipulate the people of the village. And now, the spirits he's been calling on, they're coming. And it's my fault. I saw the truth, and I didn't know what to do. But now, I have to stop it. I have to stop him. His mother's eyes widened, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the table. "Tunde, what are you talking about? Pastor Adebayo has always been a man of God. He has done so much for this community. What you're saying, it doesn't make sense." "I know it doesn't make sense," Tunde replied, his voice shaking. "But I've seen it. I've seen what's been happening in the church. There's a secret room, there's a mirror. It's not just a mirror, though. It's a portal. A portal to the river spirits. And Pastor Adebayo, he's been using it to gain power. He's been sacrificing lives, and it's only going to get worse. I have to stop him, Mother. I have to stop what's been set in motion." His mother stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she stepped forward and placed her hands on his shoulders. "Tunde, I've known you your whole life. I know you're not one to make up stories or spread fear. But this is bigger than us. You have to be careful. The darkness you're talking about, it's not something we can fight alone. There are powers at play here that we don't understand." "I know," Tunde whispered, his voice breaking. "But I can't sit back and do nothing. I have to try." His mother's eyes softened, and she pulled him into a tight hug. "Then you'll need help. You'll need to find the strength that comes from the truth. And you'll need to trust the people who are with you. But remember, don't do this alone." Tunde nodded against her shoulder, feeling the weight of his mother's words. I won't be alone. That night, Tunde couldn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions, and fears. The more he thought about what Madame Folktale had said, the more he realized how little he understood. The river spirits, the serpent god, the mirror, all of it was part of something much bigger than Pastor Adebayo's lies. This wasn't just about one man's power, it was about an ancient evil that had been lurking in the shadows for generations. And it was up to him to stop it. Tunde's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his door. He rose slowly from his bed and opened the door to find his father standing in the doorway, his face grave. Tunde, I know you've been troubled, his father said softly. I've seen it in your eyes. You've learned something, haven't you? Tunde nodded, his heart heavy. Yes, father. I've learned the truth. But I don't know how to stop it. The evil that's been hidden in the church, it's bigger than I thought. I don't know what to do. His father placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his grip firm. The truth will set you free, son. But you have to be prepared for what comes next. The darkness is strong, but so is the light. You have the strength to fight it. You've always had it. Tunde looked up at his father, seeing the wisdom and love in his eyes. But I'm afraid, father. I don't know if I can do it. You don't have to do it alone, his father said. The village will stand with you. You're not the only one who's seen what's going on. There are others, people who have been affected, people who know the truth. And when you face the darkness, you'll have the strength of all of us behind you. Tunde felt a sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. The village would stand with him. I'll do it, Tunde said, his voice steady. I'll face it. I'll stop it. Tunde's thoughts swirled like a whirlwind, his mind racing faster than his feet could carry him. He had spent the night in quiet contemplation, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The church, the mirror, the river spirits, it all felt like a bad dream, something so surreal that he still couldn't fully accept the reality of it. He had uncovered a dark truth, but that truth was far from comforting. What would it cost him to stop this evil? And how far was he willing to go? But he knew one thing for certain, he couldn't walk away from this. The village, the people he had known his entire life, were depending on him. His family, his community, they all trusted him, even if they didn't know the full extent of the danger that loomed over them. And now, with Pastor Adebayo's lies exposed, it was up to Tunde to face the evil that had taken root in their church and rip it out from its very foundation. The morning sun barely peeked through the heavy clouds that hung low in the sky. Tunde stood in front of his house, looking out at the village, the place he had always known as home. Yet, now it felt foreign. The people who smiled at him on the streets, the children who played in the alleys, he couldn't help but wonder how many of them had unknowingly been touched by the dark forces that had been allowed to flourish in the church. How many had offered their faith, their trust, and their souls to a man who had used them for his own gain. Tunde, his father's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see his father standing at the door, his face filled with concern. Are you ready? Tunde nodded, though he didn't feel ready. How could anyone be ready for something like this? The weight of the task ahead of him was heavy, and every step felt like a step into the unknown. But his father's calm presence gave him the strength he needed. You don't have to do this alone, his father said, stepping closer. The village is with you. I'm with you. Tunde met his father's gaze, the warmth of his words easing some of the tension in his chest. I know, he said quietly. But it's not just the village that needs saving. It's the church. And it's the souls that Pastor Adebayo has claimed in the name of false miracles. I have to stop him, father. I have to stop what he's done. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance. Then let's go. You're not just fighting for your village, son. You're fighting for the truth. Tunde walked with purpose through the village, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the task ahead of him would be unlike anything he had ever faced. The village square was bustling with activity as the people went about their daily routines, oblivious to the dark reality that Tunde had uncovered. As he walked past the familiar buildings, he could feel the eyes of the villagers on him, some offering nods of encouragement, others avoiding his gaze. But none of them knew what he knew. None of them understood the depth of the evil that had been allowed to fester in their midst. Tunde arrived at the church gates, his steps faltering for a brief moment. The massive doors that once represented hope and salvation now felt like a barrier, one that separated him from the truth. The church had always been a place of refuge, a place where people came to seek God, to find peace. But now, the very walls of the church seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with the weight of the lies that had been built within them. He turned to his father, who had followed him silently. "We need to get inside," Tunde said, his voice low but steady. "We need to destroy the mirror and end this once and for all." His father nodded. "We will. But we need to be careful. We don't know what's waiting for us inside." Tunde nodded, then reached for the door. It creaked loudly as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty hall. The church was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity absent. There were no children running through the aisles, no choir rehearsing for the next service. The place felt abandoned, as though something had sucked the life out of it. Tunde stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. The altar, once a symbol of purity and light, now seemed to loom over him like a dark, ominous presence. His heart beat faster as he moved closer, the memories of the secret room he had discovered flooding his mind. The altar, the mirror, the spirits. He could still hear the echo of the chants, the hiss of the serpent, and the sinister whispers of the river gods. "We have to find the secret room," Tunde said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The mirror is still here. I can feel it." His father's face hardened. "We will. But be prepared for anything." They made their way through the church, passing by the rows of empty pews. The stained glass windows cast colorful shadows on the floor, the light dimming as the clouds outside thickened. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Finally, they reached the back of the church. Tunde's eyes landed on the small, unmarked door that had once led him into the room where the pastor had performed his dark rituals. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as he approached it. This was the moment. The room behind this door was where everything had started. And it was where everything would end. He reached for the handle, his hand trembling. He could already feel the presence inside, the darkness that had taken root here. He turned the handle, and the door opened with a groan. The room was just as he remembered it, dim, cold, and filled with the same heavy, suffocating air. The altar stood in the center, its black cloth still draped over it, the candles flickering in the corners. But this time, there was no mirror. The place felt empty, devoid of the power it had once held. Tunde stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "It's gone," he said softly. "The mirror is gone." But his father was not listening. He was looking at something on the floor, a dark stain that marred the otherwise clean stone. Tunde followed his gaze and froze. There, lying on the floor, was the same green-framed mirror. It was cracked, its surface shattered, but still intact enough to radiate an unsettling energy. The mirror was the key. It was the portal. And it was still here. "We have to destroy it," Tunde said, his voice firm with resolve. His father nodded, his face grim. "But be careful. This is where the evil lives." Tunde stepped forward, his heart pounding. He reached for the mirror, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold glass. The moment his hand made contact, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and grow. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room. The mirror shuddered in Tunde's hands, and a wave of energy surged through him. He staggered backward, his heart racing as the room seemed to spin. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he saw the faces of the spirits, twisted, contorted, and reaching out toward him. "Father!" Tunde gasped, struggling to hold onto the mirror. The energy was too much. It was pulling him in. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the energy stopped. The room fell silent again, and Tunde blinked, his vision clearing. He looked down at the mirror in his hands. It was no longer glowing. The crack had deepened, but it was no longer the powerful object it had once been. Tunde took a deep breath and slowly turned the mirror over. He could see the symbols etched into the back, ancient markings, symbols of the river spirits. This was the key. This was the portal. But now, it was broken. The curse had been broken. But it wasn't over yet. The spirits were still out there, and the evil was still lurking in the shadows. "We did it," Tunde said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We stopped it." His father stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. "Not yet. The spirits are still here. We need to seal this place, once and for all." Tunde nodded. I'll help you. The air in the church felt suffocating as Tunde held the shattered mirror in his hands. The once glowing green symbols were now faded and dark, the power that had once radiated from it extinguished. But despite the sense of victory he felt, a gnawing unease lingered in his chest. The battle was far from over. The spirits, the ones that had fed on the fear and despair of the villagers, had not been banished. They were still out there, waiting, lurking in the shadows. Tunde glanced at his father, who stood at the back of the room, his face filled with a mixture of resolve and worry. He had always been a pillar of strength in the village, the man everyone looked to in times of trouble. But even he seemed unnerved by the presence in this room. It wasn't just the mirror or the ritual altar, it was something deeper, something ancient that had been unleashed. We have to destroy it, Tunde whispered, his voice breaking the silence that had settled in the room. We have to burn it. His father nodded, his eyes scanning the room one last time. Yes, but it's not just the mirror we have to destroy. It's everything that was connected to it. The altar, the symbols, the power that's been siphoning life from the village. We need to break it all. Tunde took one final look at the altar, the place where Pastor Adebayo had performed his dark rituals. The altar was empty now, no candles or strange offerings. But the memory of the spirits that had once hovered above it, the way they had moved, their dark whispers, still haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching. I'm ready, Tunde said, his voice steady. He knew what he had to do. But in that moment, his thoughts turned to the villagers. What would they say when they learned the truth? How many of them had been deceived by Pastor Adebayo's so-called miracles? How many had unknowingly given their souls to the spirits in exchange for false promises? The burden of this knowledge weighed heavily on him. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The truth will come out. And when it does, the village will heal. But you must be strong, son. The path ahead will not be easy. Tunde nodded, his resolve firming. Let's do it. They left the secret room and made their way back to the main hall of the church. The villagers who had gathered outside were still waiting, unaware of what had transpired within. Tunde knew that the revelation would shock them to their core, but it was necessary. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. As they stepped into the light of the village square, Tunde's eyes swept over the crowd. He saw faces he recognized, his friends, his neighbors, his fellow worshippers. They were all waiting for answers, waiting for something to hold on to. The air was thick with tension. The villagers knew that something had changed, but they didn't know exactly what. Chief Alamide, who had been standing at the front, turned when he saw Tunde and his father approach. His eyes were filled with questions, and his face was lined with worry. Tunde, what happened? The chief asked, his voice low but urgent. Tunde took a deep breath, his hands still trembling as he held the broken mirror. The moment had come. He had to tell them the truth. It's over, Tunde said, his voice clear, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Pastor Adebayo's reign of darkness is over. The mirror, the altar, it's all been destroyed. But the truth is far darker than any of us could have imagined. The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on Tunde, waiting for him to continue. His father stepped forward, placing a hand on Tunde's shoulder in silent support. Tunde looked around at the people who had trusted Pastor Adebayo, who had believed in his miracles, who had followed him in faith. Pastor Adebayo was not a man of God. He was deceived, just like the rest of us. He opened a portal, a doorway to the river spirits, to the serpent god. The miracles he performed were not real. They were the result of sacrifices, of souls being offered to gain power. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The shock was palpable. The faces in the crowd twisted with confusion, disbelief, and horror. It was impossible to comprehend, impossible to believe. But Tunde knew that they had to hear the truth. There was no turning back now. The mirror that Pastor Adebayo used, Tunde continued, his voice steady, it was no ordinary mirror. It was an ancient artifact, a key to the spirit world. It fed on darkness, on fear, on the souls of those who believed in his lies. And it wasn't just Pastor Adebayo who was responsible. There were others, members of the church who helped him, who turned a blind eye to the evil that was unfolding. Chief Alamide's face was pale. But why didn't anyone see this? Why didn't we know? He asked, his voice filled with anguish. Tunde's eyes locked with the chief's, and he could see the weight of guilt in his gaze. Because the pastor hid it? He kept it hidden behind the church's walls, behind the mask of faith. He manipulated us, made us believe that we were walking with God, when in reality, we were being led straight into the hands of evil. Tunde paused, his heart heavy with the burden of what he was about to say. I know this is hard to believe. But the power Pastor Adebayo used, it's not gone. The river spirits are still out there. The portal is still open. And if we don't close it, they will return. The silence that followed was deafening. The villagers stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to process what Tunde had just revealed. Some of them turned away, unwilling to accept the truth. Others stood still, their faces pale and shocked, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. We have to close the portal, Tunde said, his voice breaking the silence. We need to destroy everything that connects us to that evil. We need to banish the spirits once and for all. Chief Olamide took a step forward, his face set in determination. Then we will do it. We will stand together, as one, and we will destroy the evil that has taken root in our village. The crowd began to stir, murmurs of agreement spreading through the group. Tunde could see the resolve in their eyes. They were ready to fight. Ready to take back their village from the darkness that had gripped it for so long. But just as the villagers began to rally, a familiar voice called out from the back of the crowd. You think it's that simple? Tunde turned to see Pastor Adebayo standing at the edge of the village square. He was no longer bound, no longer the broken man they had dragged out of the church. He stood tall, his hands free, and there was a dark gleam in his eyes. Tunde's heart skipped a beat. How was this possible? Hadn't they just destroyed everything? Pastor Adebayo's lips curled into a twisted smile. You fools? You think you can destroy what has been built over centuries? You think you can stop the power of the river spirits? You've only just begun to understand. The portal is open, and now, it's too late. Tunde stepped forward, his fists clenched. No. It's not too late. We can stop you. The pastor laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. You think you can stop me? You think you can stop the serpent god? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Tunde's mind raced. This wasn't over. The fight was far from finished. The spirits were still out there, and now, Pastor Adebayo was free, more dangerous than ever. The villagers stood around Tunde, their faces filled with fear, but also with determination. We must not give up, Chief Olamide said, his voice steady. We have the truth on our side. And that is stronger than any spirit. Tunde nodded, his resolve hardening. We will finish this. We will close the portal, and we will send the spirits back where they belong. The winds that had been steadily howling through the village now seemed to grow louder, whipping against the buildings, rattling the trees, and carrying with them the unsettling feeling that something dark was on the horizon. The tension in the air was thick, and it wasn't just the weather. No, something far more sinister was at play. Tunde could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the presence of evil, waiting, lurking just out of sight. The people of the village had gathered in the square, their faces marked with fear and uncertainty, but there was something else in their eyes, a spark of defiance, a determination to stand against the darkness that had invaded their lives. They had heard Tunde's words, felt the weight of his revelation, and now, they were ready to act. But even as they rallied, Tunde could not shake the feeling that it was all too quiet. The village was still, but beneath that silence lay an undercurrent of dread. Pastor Adebayo's words had not been a mere boast, they were a warning. Tunde had seen the way the pastor had looked at him, the twisted gleam in his eyes. The man wasn't just an ordinary deceiver, he was a vessel for something much darker. And now that the village had begun to wake up to the truth, the pastor was going to do everything in his power to stop them. We have to act now, Tunde said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The portal is still open. The spirits are still here, and they're not going to let us close it without a fight. Chief Olamide, who had been standing near the front of the gathering, nodded gravely. We cannot waste any more time. We need to destroy everything that connects this church to the spirits. We need to burn the altar, burn the mirror, and purify this place. Only then will the village be free. Tunde looked around at the faces of the villagers, his heart swelling with pride. They were scared, yes, but they were also determined. They had seen the truth, and now they were willing to fight for their freedom, for their lives, and for their souls. We have one chance, Tunde continued, his voice firm. We need to get to the church before Pastor Adebayo can do anything else. He has the power of the river spirits on his side, but we have the truth. And that is stronger than anything he can throw at us." The villagers nodded, their expressions set with purpose. Tunde could feel the energy shift in the air, as if the very ground beneath them had begun to hum with the collective will of those standing around him. They were ready? But just as the villagers began to move toward the church, a chilling voice called out from the back of the crowd. "You think you can stop me?" Tunde turned to see Pastor Adebayo standing at the edge of the square, a twisted smile playing across his lips. His clothes were tattered, his eyes wild with an intensity that sent a shiver down Tunde's spine. The pastor had changed. There was no longer the calm, composed man they had once known. Instead, there was something darker, something almost inhuman in his gaze. "You're too late," Pastor Adebayo continued, his voice dripping with malice. "The spirits are already with me. They have already given me power beyond your understanding. You cannot stop what has already begun." Tunde stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "It's over, Pastor. Your reign of terror ends today. We've seen the truth. The spirits you worship, they are nothing but shadows, feeding off fear and despair. And you," he pointed at the pastor, "you are just their puppet." Pastor Adebayo laughed, the sound harsh and grating, echoing through the village square. "You think you can defeat me? You think your little prayers and chants can save you? The serpent god is not something you can fight with faith alone. The spirits are ancient. They are powerful. And he spread his arms wide, as though inviting the very forces of darkness to take him in, "I am their vessel." Tunde's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let fear take hold of him. "The truth is our weapon. And we will use it to destroy you." The pastor's expression twisted into something darker, something more dangerous. "You think you can stop me with the truth? Let me show you the power of the spirits. Let me show you what happens when you try to stand against them." With a sudden, violent motion, Pastor Adebayo raised his hands, and the ground beneath Tunde's feet seemed to tremble. The wind howled louder, the sky darkening as though the heavens themselves were reacting to the evil that had been unleashed. The villagers gasped, some stepping back in fear, but Tunde stood his ground. He had seen this power before. He had felt it. And now, it was time to face it head-on. The air grew thick, and Tunde could feel the presence of the river spirits closing in. He knew they were watching, waiting. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, as though it was alive with the energy of the spirits. And then, something strange happened. The air in front of him shimmered, and a figure materialized from the shadows. It was a woman, her face twisted with an otherworldly expression, her eyes glowing with a sinister light. Her body was wrapped in robes made of water, her skin slick with liquid that seemed to flow like a river. Tunde's heart stopped. This was one of the spirits, the river gods. The serpent god's emissary? "You have no power here," the woman hissed, her voice a whisper of water and wind. "We are the river. We are eternal." Tunde's breath caught in his throat. The figure was terrifying, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of vulnerability. He didn't have much time. The spirits were here, but he had to break through their hold. "Go back to the river." Tunde shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "You have no power over us anymore. The truth will set us free." The woman's face twisted in anger. "You fool. You think you can stand against the serpent god? You think you can stop the flood?" She raised her hand, and in an instant, the ground beneath Tunde's feet erupted. The earth cracked, and water surged from the cracks, flooding the square. The villagers screamed in terror, running in all directions as the water rose higher and higher, encircling them. Tunde stumbled backward, his heart racing. The spirits were real. The danger was real. And the flood was rising faster than he could keep up with. "Father!" Tunde shouted, turning toward his father, who had been standing nearby. But the elder was nowhere to be seen. The villagers were scattering, lost in the chaos of the rising water. And then, in the midst of the madness, Tunde heard a voice. "Destroy the mirror." It was Chief Olamide's voice, rising above the roar of the water. Tunde's heart surged with recognition. The chief was still with them. He wasn't giving up. The truth was still their weapon. Tunde rushed toward the church, his feet slipping in the rising water. He had to destroy the mirror. That was the key. If they could destroy the source of the power, the spirits would lose their hold. And so would Pastor Adebayo. He reached the church doors, but they were locked. He didn't hesitate. With a powerful kick, he broke the door open, charging inside. The altar was still there, the remnants of the mirror scattered on the ground. But the power that had once filled the room was gone. It was now just an empty space, the energy of the spirits fading. Tunde approached the altar, his hands shaking as he reached for the shards of the mirror. He didn't know how much time he had. The spirits were still coming, still angry, and the floodwaters were rising faster than ever. He stood in front of the altar, clutching the broken pieces of the mirror. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "This is the end." With all the strength he could muster, Tunde raised the mirror shards high and slammed them onto the stone altar. The room shook with a deafening crack. The flood outside surged, and the air was filled with an eerie silence. And then, as if the world itself had exhaled, everything went still. The spirits were gone. The water receded. And Pastor Adebayo's voice, once filled with pride and malice, fell silent.